Las cosas que necesito en la vida ya están aquí. Las cosas que necesito en la vida ya están aquí.
Welcome to the Camino Cafe podcast, coming to you from the heart of the Camino Frances and Rabanel del Camino. I'm Lee Brennan, your host, two-time pilgrim, U.S. resident, and currently living in Spain. Grab a drink, pull up a chair. It's pilgrim story time at the Camino Cafe. Hey everyone, welcome to the Camino Cafe. I am so excited to be back for our second season, and right now I'm sitting in Spain. I just finished walking a Camino, and I can't quit talking about the Camino, so I'm starting the podcast right back up. And today, as I mentioned, we have Sanjiva with us, and Sanjiva is in Australia. So Sanjiva, I wonder if you would just tell all of our viewers and listeners a little bit about your life in Australia.
Okay. My life in Australia started about 23 years ago. I'm much older than that. I was born in Sri Lanka, grew up in Sri Lanka, went to medical school and worked as a doctor in Sri Lanka, and then went overseas to Hong Kong, worked there for about 5 years. I did some postgraduate study in England, and then in 1997, we migrated to Australia. So been here ever since in Melbourne, which is in the southeast corner of the country. The weather's very different to Sri Lanka. And so we've been here, my wife, my two children, and myself.
All right.
And I've been working as a doctor here in Melbourne. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So how are things right now with COVID and what's going on in your area of the world right now? I had heard that Australians were going to be able to travel again soon. And I know everybody here in Spain is missing all the Australians walking. So have you heard any recent updates? Will you be able to travel soon?
Nothing yet. I used to go to Sri Lanka once a year at least. And since February 2020, I haven't been. But we've been in Melbourne. This has been the city, I think, that has been most locked down in the world. We came out of lockdown number 6 about 2 weeks ago, and finally were achieving 90% vaccine numbers or vaccinations. We are getting many more of the freedoms that we didn't have. Still, there's Australia like 7 different countries on one continent. Each state has its own laws, and you can't travel from state A to state B. So Australia is going back on the Camino. I think by about next year, we should be able to travel without coming back into quarantine afterwards.
Okay, so fantastic. Good. 6 lockdowns. Wow. Okay. Wow, I really hope things get better and that you are able to travel again, especially back to Sri Lanka and wherever else you want to go. So I'm super excited about our conversation. I mean, you've done a lot of things in your life, and you're an author, and you're Camino Pilgrim, and you wrote a book about the Camino. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to read it prior to us sitting down and talking, but I'm really excited to learn more about it. And I think the very first thing I'm very intrigued by is the title of your Camino book. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about how did you come up with that title? Why did you call it what you did?
I'll just show you a screenshot of the cover.
Okay, great.
That will tell you what's happening. I'll share my screen. That's the cover, right? And we call it Strangers on the Camino because I walked the Camino with my son. And that's why it's called a Father, Son, and a Holy Trail. And my son had been in New York for about 6 years. And we met after a long time in Spain because we decided to walk the Camino on his last visit to Melbourne. And so when we started walking, it was like two strangers. We'd been away. This is the little boy I'd carried on my shoulders when he was little. And so children grow up and then they grow into their own adult. And so they have their own ideas. And so we were walking like two separate individuals, maybe strangers after 6 years. Also, having grown up in Sri Lanka which is a very multicultural, multi-religious place. You have Catholics and Buddhists and Muslims and Hindus. So I knew something about the Catholic religion, but didn't know all about the myths and the uh, stories behind the Catholic saints. So we were strangers to the Catholic religion, and
Ah,
also we were strangers in Spain. Um
yes.
I practiced and studied a bit of Spanish before I went. According to my daughter, who speaks fluent Spanish, my Spanish was terrible, but we managed to get by. So we strangers to Spain, strangers to the Catholic religion, and strangers to each other. The other thing was
Mm,
at the monastery. Uh, I forget the place where it's the big Samos, the big monastery in Samos. We
yes.
saw this picture, and as you'll know, most of the paintings of cherubs and angels, they're all white. There are
Yes.
no angelitos negros.
Right.
And so when we saw this, suddenly my son nudged me and said, "Hey, Tati, did you see that?" I said, "What? Did you see that picture?" I said, "Yeah." And he winks at me and says, "Do you think there's room in heaven for people like you and me?" And we both burst out laughing. And I thought that would be a great picture because on the Camino, we were among the very few, shall we say, non-Caucasian people who walk in the Camino. There's nobody else from Sri Lanka, no, very few from India, that Indian subcontinent. There are a lot of people from East Asia. So again, this depicted the strangers
Mm,
on the Camino, right? That's it.
ah,
Lee,
wow. Okay.
informal. So let me go and put the light on
Okay.
because,
Yeah, it's
right,
nighttime where you are right now.
exactly. That looks better.
Morning time for me. Yeah, perfect. All right. So many questions I want to follow up on that. Thank you for that
Okay.
detail. Uh, can you tell me how old was your son approximately, and how old were you when you two walked?
This is going to be a confession. I don't like telling people my age, but
I
I was
know.
I was 62 when we walked. In fact, I celebrated my 62nd birthday
Oh,
uh, on the Camino, and on the morning of my birthday, we went down to have coffee, and suddenly three of our compañeros who were walking with us the previous day, they came out carrying five cupcakes with little candles on them and sang happy birthday. And
oh.
I was totally amazed, and I knew my son had told them, and so I celebrated my 62nd birthday on the Camino. And my son
Wow.
was about half that age. He was, yeah, he was 30.
30. Wow. Okay. So, okay. So many questions around this. So, your son's living in New York, you're in Melbourne, and you decide to go on the Camino. So, how did you know about the Camino in the first place? Like, how did that even come up on the bucket list for you yourself and then for the two of you to go together?
I think it all started with my son giving me a copy of Paulo Coelho's book, The
Ah,
Pilgrimage.
okay.
And he had read it, and I read it, and then one of us told the other one of us, said, "Hey, it'd be great if we can do this together, no, you and I." And I think he said it to me, and I said, "Yeah, that'll be great." And then it would have been one of those, it'll be great to do it, we must do it someday, and it never gets done. And
Right.
then um, the year before, when he was in Melbourne, I said, "Shivantha, let's do it next year because I have a spell of sabbatical leave coming up from the university and I can take that time off." And you have finished your, he went to America having done his initial degree here to study at the American Academy of Dramatic Art in New York. He was set on
Ah,
being an actor and he had just finished his 3 years there. And I said, "You just finished your thing there. So before you actually start working, let's do it. Otherwise, I'll be too
mm,
old to go and you won't be able to leave from." So we decided to do it. Let's do it. And that's how we planned. And
okay.
just to go into more detail, I said, "Look, let's meet in Paris. We'll take the train down." And then after that, me being an obsessive person who has to make lists of everything, I'd worked out that I get to Paris at this time and then we take this train to Saint Jean and then start walking. And I calculated everything. And about 2 weeks before I was due to leave, I called Shivantha to New York. I said, "Shivantha, I'm arriving in Paris on flight UL 563. I'll get there at 8 in the morning. and I booked a hotel near the airport. What time are you getting here? And he said, Tati, I'm going to book my flight tomorrow. And I thought, what? But then that's the difference between our generations. And I got to Paris, he got to Paris. So I had to learn that, okay, this generation, or maybe this boy does things different to the way I do it, but ultimately we reach the same uh, achievement. So we
Oh
met
my
in Paris
goodness.
and took the train and then went that way.
Oh, I love so much about that. So how did that impact you for the entire walk? Because you're a planner, he's not. And so, this was pre-COVID time. So I'm just wondering, how did that go for you? Like, did you plan out exactly where you guys were staying each night? Or did you, how did you plan that out? Or what did you do?
We took John Brialey's book. I
Okay.
think that was the most useful. Anyone wants a recommendation, that's the most single useful thing you can have on the Camino. And we
Yes.
use that, so it set out where the sorry albergues are and what you can. And we realized every 10-15 kilometers there'll be an albergue. So one thing I told Shivantha was we won't plan exactly where we're staying, but one thing I learned in my time in the army is that if you're going in the jungle, you always get to your night harbor by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That gives you time to settle in and do things. You don't try to arrive at 9 in the night or walk as far as you can and then get there. So I said, as long as we get to where we're going by 3 or 4, the latest, let's stay wherever we can. And we did that.
Mm,
And also, as he said, I learned to let go, not to um, do the obsessive planning I did. And he also learned to realize that, hey, maybe there's a little benefit in having a broad plan. And we got on. And also, I had to learn that as we go, we compromise,
mm,
which is something that parents who have been used to telling their children, do this, do that, don't forget to submit that homework on time. But I realize that these are adults and they can do things as well as, if not better than, you can do the older person. So we compromised. And at the end of the journey, I remember I wrote in my book, I said we started the journey as father and son,
mhm,
and we ended it as two adult men who had great love as well as respect for each other.
mm,
And that was something I learned in the community. So the strangers became friends.
mm. So you really entered into a whole new relationship as
Yeah, yeah,
adults
that's right.
during
That's
this.
right.
Wow, that's very powerful. Okay, so you said just so many things right here I want to talk about. First off, I'll go back to two of the tips that you mentioned. I really love your idea. You said you learned this from the military, and that is to arrive where you're going by about 3 p.m.
Because the thing is, if you're in the jungle, night falls early in the jungle. If you get there by 3, you have time to survey the area where you're camping, put up your tents, start cooking your dinner. And so by the time dusk turns into night, you're well settled for the night. And I used to see
Yes.
when we were on the Camino, we've got in there, we've got our bunk, we've had our shower, and then stragglers coming in at 7, 8, and I'm thinking, didn't you think that you need a place to stay? Are you just going to drop in here and collapse on the bed? So
Yes.
that was a very useful tip. And
Yeah, that's
so
a
that's what
great tip.
that's the only time we planned to stay. There were a couple of places we planned to stay. One was at a place called San Nicolas,
Mm,
the albergue of San Nicolas, which was, we stayed the previous night, and we had a friend, an Italian gentleman called Ruggiero, and he said he was going to stay at San Nicolas. And my son speaks fluent Italian. So he and
okay.
Ruggiero had this conversation, and then he comes and says, Tati, we must go and stay at San Nicolas. That's the place where they wash your feet.
Yes,
You,
yes.
that's right. And that was good. We arrived there about 12 or 1 o'clock, and we had only 12 people are allowed to stay there. So you had to be a first come, first serve to get one of the bunks.
Right.
But that was one of the most memorable stays on the Camino. The stay at San Nicolas at Puente de Itero, I think it's called. San Nicolas
Excellent.
Monastery.
All right. So, um, yeah, I totally agree with you about that arrival time. I would get very nervous if I wasn't going to be where I was planning on spending the night, unless I was getting there around 3 or 4 p.m. So I didn't even know that was an official strategy. So I love that. And I think that's a great tip for our listeners and our viewers. The other thing you mentioned was John's book, which I agree with you. Having that guide with you is so helpful. I tried to avoid taking it this time. And because I thought, well, you're trying to get your backpack down to the lowest weight you can. And just for viewers and listeners, I'm just going to say I ended up buying the map portion in Saint John, even though I own numerous copies of that book, because I was like, I'm going to have it. So even though I know there are great apps out there, I still think there's something about physically having that map book. And, there's a lot of uses for it. All right. So you go on the Camino, you're with your son, and you're having this experience, and you are learning how to have this relationship on the Camino. And that was something I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, because both times that I've walked, I've thought about what would it be like to walk with someone that I know versus walking with people that I'm meeting along the way. So I wonder for people out there who are considering maybe going with a partner or with their son or daughter, which I'm doing with my dad in May. We're going to do the Portuguese route.
Good.
What kind of tips would you have for us to be more effective at a compromise and getting along during this really long journey? I mean, you guys walked over 500 miles together. That's a big trip to take with one person. So what kind of tips would you offer to all of us out there on how to have the most success as possible?
First, I think you don't try to micromanage the journey. You go as it flows, you take things as they come. Two, remember that if you're walking with an adult child, it's two adults walking. There's no hierarchical situation there. It's not like telling, go and do your homework. Oh, you have to accept that. Okay. And we decided in the morning, I'm a bit of an early bird. My son is not. So I said, look, we'll go when you're ready. One place we got up early, we were having our coffee in the morning and there was this girl who we met 5:30 or 6 o'clock it was, and she was setting off, and Shivantha said, hey, why are you leaving so early? She said, no, I have to walk 40 kilometers today. Wow. I said, okay, that's her Camino. And so we did goodbye, and then we went back to rest and sleep, and after everybody else took off, we took off at about 8. And most mornings we left round about 7:30, 8. We were usually the last to leave. But I decided, instead of me leaving early and rushing, I'll leave at the time he wants, because ultimately you get to the destination that is intended for you. That's one. Two, I think compromise is the most important thing. And you accept what the other says. I used to ask him for advice. What do you think we should do here? That may be something new for the old man to ask the young man, what should you do? But that's how you do it. We met, it was interesting. We met a couple from Australia. Here, we are sitting at this, did you stay in Orison?
Yes.
Orison? Yeah. Okay. We stayed in Orison the first night, and the girl was doing cooking. At the end of dinner, she said, now you have to all introduce yourselves to each other. Whoa. And so I talked to the lady who was sitting next to me, who knew as much English as I knew French, which is about 5 sentences. And very painstakingly, we made conversation. And then as soon as dinner was over, she and her husband got up, or she or whoever she was walking with got up and went. So then I turned to the lady who was sitting next to me on the other side, and I said, excuse me, do you speak English? And she said, shoot, it's the only language I speak. She was Australian. I couldn't do the accent well, but sorry. And we both started laughing. And she was walking the Camino with her daughter, who, so we stuck up a friendship with them, and we spent a lot of time walking together. And after we came back to Australia, we went and visited them and a few of the other people we'd met on the Camino.
Wow.
So we maintained those friendships. We made friends with another man from Canada, Greg, and he lives in Quebec, which is close enough to New York. Shivantha has visited him. He's visited Shivantha, and we've talked to him on Zoom. So that friendship has continued. The friendship with Leonie and Claire has continued. So on the Camino, you meet strangers who become your compañeros and your friends.
Yeah, I totally agree. I interviewed, I think it was Mark David Walsh, who's also Australian. And he mentioned, you start off walking alone, but you end up walking with 500 people, like you're not actually ever alone. And I kept thinking about this during my last Camino, how true that is. What do you think it is about the Camino that, we're taking this thing that's called a pilgrimage, which is typically done, individually, maybe traditionally. And yet I found that myself and everybody I was walking with, we were really also though working on being very connected with the pilgrims that we were meeting. So what is it that you think about the Camino or pilgrimage in general calls us to start making these friends as we're walking? Why does that phenomena happen?
I think one is you're meeting like-minded people, and also you're in a kind of communion with nature. No, I was walking with one pilgrim. Shivantha was going on ahead with somebody else. I was walking more slowly, and we got chatting. And he just told me, I'm a very devout atheist.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, what's leading this conversation leading to? And he said, but you don't have to believe in a creator or even have a personal relationship with the creator to appreciate the fruits of creation. I thought that was very profound. You don't have to
Yes.
be subscribed to a particular narrow religion. You're just admiring creation. You're one with nature. You're with what someone might call is a universe, and you're walking with other people who have the same idea. So that like-mindedness helps you to make friends. And the other thing is you're meeting people who usually you've never met before and you'll probably never meet again. So when you talk, you can talk freely without being afraid of compromising yourself by saying something that is awkward. You can be frank, not rudely frank, but politely frank, and share ideas. I mean, there were some people we talked to who tell us things about their personal lives that they probably never told their neighbors.
Yes.
So that openness, that connection, I think that's what makes you become become connected,
Yeah.
become able to open out to each other. That's how it is.
Yes. Oh, I love your
We
description on
talked about
that.
feminist, uh, just a digression. Since we came back, there are various Camino groups, and we found a group in Melbourne that meets once a month on the last Friday of each month. One of us organizes the dinner, and we just get together for a good meal, a few good drinks, and the opportunity just to chat and share thoughts and memories of the Camino. And we haven't had any up to now for this year, but I'm looking forward to one in December, which is usually held the Friday before Christmas. And it's
Okay.
meeting all these old friends who are now very close friends.
Yeah. And do you find that even though I'm imagining many of those people in this group you never walked with, but
No,
because
no,
you're all pilgrims, you automatically have this connection and become
that's
easily
right.
friends?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed that over the years since my first walk that most of my friends are Camino pilgrims now, and we may have never walked together, but we have this immediate connection. So I love how you described it, that the like-minded people that were in nature, and the fact that you can be very frank, not rude, but you can be very frank about what you're sharing. And there is definitely an openness and a connection when we're out there walking, to the connection to nature, the connection to creator, the connection to one another. Connection within your own self is happening that maybe
That's true.
we're not seeing in everyday life. It's there, but when we're on the Camino, we're so focused that those things come into view a little bit more easily. When you
And
and your son, oh, go
what you
ahead.
said about something about yourself, you get to find out about yourself also because there's the solitude you have,
Yes.
and you're not um, constrained by the humdrum activities of your mundane life. In fact, my
Yep.
son was saying about this play, As You Like It.
Yes.
He's in with the Melbourne Theatre Company. He's acting in As You Like It, and in that, it's a story of how the Duke gets banished from his dukedom, and he goes and lives in the forest with his people. And when
Yes.
he's in the forest, he says, this is wonderful. We are not here with the trappings of court. We can see there's beauty in the brooks and the stones, and we're just happy here because you're released from the humdrum, um, mundane, rigid activities of your usual existence. You have time to just be,
Yeah.
and that happens on the Camino.
Yes. Just being.
Just be.
How did you work out finding those moments of solitude when you were walking with your son? Did you guys divide up the day sometimes? Did one of you walk ahead, or did you always walk together no matter?
No, no. We didn't always walk together like two soldiers in line.
Yeah.
He'd sometimes go ahead, I'd go ahead. I might stop, but you always know that we are going to catch up in time. And um, sometimes you walk and sometimes you walk together, but you're having our own thoughts.
Mm.
That also happens. So it's a question of a sort of loose togetherness. We might chat and talk, we might chat with somebody else. Three of us might just walk and be thinking our own thoughts as we go. And there's one beautiful place. You're walking past the lake, and as you went,
Yeah.
you could hear the birds, and it was just open nature. And then my son and I, we both spontaneously stopped. And then he said, Tati, this is like the promised land, no? The
Mm.
promised land was a story because when he was a little boy, there's a nature reserve in Sri Lanka, and I had, as usual, put him on my shoulders, and he walked along the beach, and he came to where the river just meets the sea, and there were water buffalo, there were birds, deer, and we just stopped and looked at me as a little boy. Tati, this is the promised land, isn't it? I think I had few too much of stories. And so that promised land became in a family joke, and not a family joke, a family um, memory, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so when we came to this place with the same kind of um, quiet and natural surroundings, he said, "This is like the promised land," no? And he started laughing.
Mm.
You see places like that. You're walking, you sometimes get to the top of a mountain, there's mist, it's all empty. You can't see anyone from within eyesight. And you stop and think, okay, this is nature and the world. I'm
Wow.
trying to think of any other places that we did see now. Those are two places that I do remember.
Wow. What a full circle story to have carried your son on your shoulders and experienced the promised land in Sri Lanka. And then to now be on the Camino and you've got this grown man standing next to you, still saying, Daddy, here's the promised
This
land.
is the promised land, and we started then talking about the nature reserve in Sri Lanka. It's called Yala, and talking about the nature reserve and um, how we spend time. Then it's amazing because when you reach adult life, there are certain memories of childhood that you always carry with you, happy
Mm,
memories. And I
yes.
remember things that say I'd done with my dad and my mom. And so then you see something that triggers that memory of that happy event.
Mm,
So
wow. That is a
the
great
promised land.
story. Well, you've mentioned several places that you really enjoyed. Do you recall what was your favorite town, favorite city, favorite village that you recall walking through that you'd maybe like to walk again through?
Hmm. We liked San Nicolas, which is where we came to that old albergue where it was a very moving ceremony where the hospitaleros actually washed the feet of the pilgrims. And
Yeah.
that was good. The other place that we liked was the the place of Orbiga, I think it was, um, where there was a place where the saint he had gone through. I just had my book here and I got the places. I'll tell you where we came there at 3 o'clock, and then we went and sat in the plaza outside the church,
Mhm.
and just sat, enjoyed the sun, had a glass of wine,
Mm,
and usually if I was in Melbourne, I'd be rushing to the clinic or going to university. I'd be busy,
yes.
and here it was. The place was something Orbiga, Hospitality Orbiga,
Ah,
where they had that's where I think the
the
former
bridge.
monk used to make garlic soup, and there's a
Yes.
lovely um, plaza in front of the church. That was a nice place.
Mm,
Then, what are the other nice places? The big cities, I was not too enamored with. I mean, we enjoyed going to Lyon and seeing the stained glass cathedral. We loved the huge cathedral in Burgos,
mm,
but the little places. The other one was where it was in Galicia, where
mm,
the Sampaio lived, and that was in um, Osebrero.
mm.
That's it. And
Yeah, I
we
love
went
that
there, and it was
place.
all misty. Lovely place, no? It was all
Yes.
misty, and we just walked through that little small village. And I remember I told Shivantha, Shivantha, this looks like the village of Asterix the Gaul. Did you know the Asterix books?
No,
There's a
huh?
famous cartoon series in Europe, and they were translated into a lot of the European languages.
Okay.
Asterix was a little he was a Gaul who lived in Gaul, France, during the time of Julius Caesar, and the Romans
Oh,
could never
okay.
subdue these people. And they had a village which had mist and little huts and things. And I said, this looked just like the village of Asterix the Gaul. It's a
Wow.
memory of childhood and the things you saw. That was nice.
Yes.
So.
I love what you mentioned about just sitting in that plaza and
mm,
enjoying having a cup of coffee and
Just
and
being, that's the word.
just being. And I wonder, why we don't do that more in our regular lives. Like you said, had you been at
Mm.
home, you'd been off working on your projects or doing something, and the Camino has this power to help us slow down. Um, did you
I
find when
think
you first started that it was hard to slow down? Like, did it take a while to get to that point? Because that's kind of far into the walk. Or did you find that right away you were able to just kind of slow down and get into the Camino pace?
as we went, because we were not trying to get to X by a certain time or by a certain, we just walked and took it as it was. The only places that we actually booked and stayed were um, in Orison, because I thought new
Mm-hmm.
place, better have some place to stay, so we booked. And we also decided we're not going to walk all the way to Roncesvalles. We'll go slowly to Orison, rest there. And again, you get to Orison and there's a deck outside Orison.
Yeah.
You can go there. And I said, Shivanta, after this long walk up the hill, I think we deserve to have a bottle of wine. So we ordered a bottle of wine, and there's someone else who was with us. Fortunately, that other person also there, so we didn't drink the whole bottle between ourselves.
Yes.
And we just sat there on the deck, looked out over the hills and the mountains in front of us, and just savored the scene. Then the next day we walked around Seval, and like that we took it easy. The Alberg at Ponte Itero at St. Nicholas, we booked a stay there, and another place we did. We didn't book, but that was when Shivantha's ankle was giving him trouble, and so we took a
Okay.
taxi from uh, Ventosa to Nahera. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Mm-hmm.
got there early, and I said, you go and rest in the room. I strapped up his ankle, and I went for a walk in the town of Nahera just to see the museum there. It was
Yes.
also nice on the Camino because, in addition to staying at places, suddenly you discover, hey, there's a museum of Atapuerca. There's another museum in Burgos. So we
Yes.
stopped and went and visited those. And a couple of days, Ponferrada was another place. Stayed. Then he found there's a castle. So we went and
Yes.
visited the castles. We took a day off just to see these places. And
Nice.
it was the ability to suddenly stop and say, hey, we stay here an extra day. Go and we'll see the museum, or we'll walk to um, there's another place where it was off the main Camino where there were some beautiful frescoes. And we
Mm.
decided, right, we'll stay here an extra day, go and walk to that place and come back. So you didn't have a rigid schedule or a timetable to work to. And there's
Mm.
one lady when we stayed at Ventosa, the hospitalero, and I told her we need to get to Santiago by the 3rd of June, because we'd arranged to get to Santiago, spend a few days there, and then take the bus and go to Lisbon, where my wife was coming to join us.
Oh, okay.
And so I said, I'd like to get there by the 3rd, because I don't want to then get delayed, going to meet my wife. She said, don't worry, on the Camino, you will take the time that you have set yourself to do it. And I thought, okay, but doesn't sound logical to a obsessive, logic-minded person like me, but let's give it a go. And we arrived there on the 3rd of June, as she said, having taken a couple of off days in Ponferrada, in Burgos, all these places. So it works.
It always works out. The Camino magic, right? Somehow it all works. Yeah, I love your description of walking with your son with loose togetherness. And the things that you're mentioning, I think are just so beautiful about the places that you enjoyed seeing and the memories that it brought back. I'm curious, with your son, with you being the planner and him not being necessarily a big planner, when you showed up in Paris or Saint Jean and you have your backpacks, did you overpack and he underpack? You know, were the backpacks completely different, or?
Yes. He overpacked, and I overpacked to a lesser degree.
Okay.
I'd taken a few things. I had a pair of shoes, a rather scruffy pair of shoes that I used to travel in. And then when we left Saint Jean, I said I'll have to wear. I had a nice pair of boots to walk with, so I put on my boots and I said, look, I can't put the shoes in my backpack, so I'll hang them on the side of my backpack. And I hung it on the side of my backpack, and my son took one look and said, Tati, look at tramp. Just leave the shoes. Now, I was trained never to throw anything away.
Okay.
That's our generation. But for the first time, I thought, okay, I'll have to either leave these shoes or carry them looking like some tramp or hobo. And I left
Yes.
the shoes in a bin outside St. John Bailey Port. So that was what I
Wow.
got rid of. And he had brought a book to read on the Camino. He had brought his laptop. The laptop was for him to communicate with his girlfriend.
Oh
Sorry, no,
my.
that's not true. He said the laptop, I brought this along, Tati, because I can then communicate with mom, no? She'll be worried about us.
Yes.
And it's not mom, no? It's to communicate with the girlfriend. And he laughed, but he realized that the laptop was also a little too heavy. And in those days, the phones were not as good as they are in 2021.
Yes.
So anyway, he had a phone. Um, I did not have a phone. I didn't believe in mobile phones at that time. I've since been convinced
Okay.
that they are essential. But so he used
Okay.
to use his phone from time to time, but he couldn't communicate with mom on the phone.
Yes.
But then we borrowed, but he had the laptop because he couldn't send that back. But in Estella, that's where most pilgrims get rid of the excess baggage. We
Yes.
went, and then he said it's going to cost me some 25 euros to send this. I said, Shivantha, but then imagine you're saving 25 euros of having to consult a doctor for your back. So
Good
send it
point.
and consider it be well spent for preventive health. So he sent it back, and yeah, like me leaving my shoes, he got rid of the book that he brought. I don't know what the book was, but it's a book to read on the Camino while you're spending the nights there. And
Yes.
yeah, he managed.
Wow.
He
I
brought
love the.
along, sorry, Lee.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
He brought along a coat which was not that warm, and we were walking with Greg from Canada, and we became good friends. Greg, Shivantha, and myself. And then Greg was leaving in uh, Larasona, I think it was. Yeah, the place where the path diverges, the other Camino joins up. And Greg was going home because he only had 2 weeks to walk. So he
Okay.
said, Shivant, your coat won't be warm enough. You take my coat. And Shivant said, how can I take your coat? He said, no, you take it, you wear it, and then when you get back to New York, you send it back to me. And we had not met Greg before the Camino, but that was kind of relationship and trust we had. And I have a photograph in my book of Greg handing his coat to Shivantha. And here, let's see if I can. That's it. That's Greg
Oh, that's
uh,
great.
giving his beautiful red Gore-Tex coat to Shivantha, and he took Shivantha's rather disreputable looking coat back to him to Canada. And
Wow.
when Shivantha got back, he went to visit Greg in Quebec and gave him back his coat. And I think his own distributor looking coat was discarded. And he got himself
What
a
a,
new coat.
what a great story of Camino providing, of that pilgrim friendship that formed, the bond so strong that Greg would turn to your son and say, here, take my coat. I don't need it. And trust that, you know, he'd get it back. And that's just a wonderful story. And I love the story of your two backpacks, about your shoes being tied to the outside of the pack. And it's interesting, the things that we think that we're going to need. And then really, I think it takes courage to get rid of those things. And but I love what you said about the money that you're spending to mail that stuff back or to get rid of it is really going to save you in the end. It's going to save your body, possibly a doctor appointment, maybe injury, whatever. So I think that's a very powerful tip. What would you
It's money
say?
spent on preventive health. Yeah? Sorry?
What's that?
No, I said it is money spent on preventive health.
Yes,
Yeah. And
preventive
there's
health.
one more story I can tell you when you have time, another story about carrying packs, but you're going to ask me something?
Oh, go ahead. Tell your story.
So we were carrying my pack, which was 10% of my body weight, and Shivantha had his heavy pack with the laptop tucked somewhere inside it. And we came to a place where there was a bit of a hill. And a young man was walking ahead of me, and then he turned around, and I was huffing and puffing with the walking sticks. And he said, Tati, your pack, Tati means father in our language. He said, Tati, you're finding difficult, I'll carry your pack. And then straight away my ego was pricked and I said, don't be silly, Shivantha, I can carry it back, don't worry. So anyway, I continued walking. And then about 10 minutes later, now he's walking ahead of me. He again stopped and waited for me to catch up, and I was huffing a bit more. And he said, Tati, I'll take your pack, it's no problem. So by this time, my refusal was a little less. I said, no, Shivantha, you can't carry 2 packs. I'll manage with this, don't worry. He looked at me and he went on. So then going further, and I was still not up to the top of the hill. And he waited, and now I was coming very slowly and just looked at me and said, Tati, give me your pack. And he took the pack and he put this pack on in front of him, and he had his pack behind, and now he's walking with 2 packs. Young fellow is 30, so he could do it. And I was happily walking along with my staff with no pack. And then we caught up with a German pilgrim. He must have weighed 130 kilos, which is a big weight in pounds.
Okay.
And he looked at me rather enviously and said, oh, you have a very good friend. I said, he's not my friend, he's my son. Which is meaning it's quite normal for the son to carry the old man's pack. And then he looked at me and said, you have a very good friend for your son. And I thought, okay, that sums it up. No, that's he said a mouthful there. That I had a son who was treating me like a friend and was carrying my pack for me when I couldn't do it. So that's another moment of the Camino I remember. You have a very good friend for your son.
Very good friend for your son. And isn't that what we want with our kids, right? Is to have that relationship as our son or daughter, but then also to have that friendship. And right there, you got to see it come to life. Beautiful, beautiful memory. We're running out of time, so there were a couple of things I wanted to make sure that we talk about. One, I would say, looking back at your walk, what would you say was your greatest challenge that you wish you would have known more about to maybe have not had to experience such a big challenge? Did you run across anything like that?
Nothing that springs to mind because we went with an open mind. It's the first time we're going to, my wife and I had been to Spain before, but that was as tourists. So it was prepared for the unexpected. And before I went, I looked up a lot of web pages and things about the Camino. There was something that I saw which had a lot of pictures and explained about Horizon and going on from there. So we knew something, but it was be prepared for the unexpected. So we were not taken unawares by the unexpected. We tried to pack for I try to pack for 10% of my body weight, and you realize you can manage it very little. You wash your clothes every evening. I learned to shower with my clothes on, and then
Yeah.
after the shower, bring them out, put some soap, and then they were ready by the next day. So that was good. So I didn't have to take 5 sets of clothes. I took only one set of boots. I got a pair of Australian Army boots, which are very good, and a pair of what in Australia are called thongs. Thongs are the
Mm.
Australian word for flip-flop slippers.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I had one of those. I think Crocs are what American people use. No,
Yes.
they call it Crocs. Yeah, these are
Yes.
Crocs
Crocs.
without the. Yeah, these are even simpler form of Crocs. Eh, wait a bit. Wait a bit. This is what in Australia is called thongs.
Ah, okay. Okay. Yeah.
Flipper
Flip
slippers.
flops or thong. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
flip-flops, I think. So, so um, yeah, I only had that and my boots. And when you got to a place in the afternoon, I take my boots out, leave them to dry. And if you went out to have dinner somewhere, I'd either go in my flip flops, or if it was a posher form of restaurant, I'd put the boots on and go. And that was it. I didn't have any extra pair of shoes. Clothes also, there were like 3 shirts, I think. And
Yeah.
that's it. And you
Yeah.
kept washing them and recycling them, so you didn't take extra clothes. Whereas there were
Yes.
some people who carried huge backpacks. And I thought,
Oh, I know. We would be at a cafe, and I would go to pick up someone's backpack just to see how heavy it was, and I could barely lift some of them. I had no idea how they were carrying so much. But I think this all goes back to earlier in the conversation when you talked about arriving by 3 p.m. I think getting to the next town is really important so that you can wash your laundry, and that helps you pack less, right? Because you can
exactly.
take care of all of your stuff and get ready for the next day because you have plenty of time. So I wanted to talk, you had mentioned that you have a friend that takes veterans on Camino, and that you have a friend right now in Australia who's waiting to get to go on Camino. So I wonder if maybe you could just chat a few moments
Sure.
about that.
Yeah, there are two people who are doing this. One is Father Steve Rindle, who's in Texas.
Yes.
He's a ex-army paratrooper who subsequently trained as a priest, went back to the army as an army chaplain, and now is a civilian chaplain. And the other one is a man called Brad Gennaro, who was a senior Navy petty officer. And I read Brad's book, and it resonated with me because I've served in the military as a doctor, and I've seen
Right.
kids who are sent to war come back broken, and
Yeah.
they're dealing with PTSD and all sorts of mental issues. And so I read Brad's book, and he said he hit rock bottom, and then he walked the Camino, and on the Camino he experiences healing. And once he
Mhm.
finished, he decided to set up an organization to help veterans who would like to learn how to deal with their PTSD better, to experience some form of healing on the Camino. And that reason, I thought this makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
So Brad advertises, as does Steve, for people to apply, and he takes not just American veterans but from all over the world. And last time I think Brad took someone from Poland and former Yugoslavia, and because we've been in touch again as the Camino, I wrote to him, he wrote back to me, we exchanged books, Brad and I. His book is called A Soldier to Santiago.
Mm.
So he said, Sanjiva, do you have any Australian veterans who would like to come? And there is a friend of mine. He's an Australian veteran. He's a bit older than the Afghanistan, Iraq veterans who actually fought in Vietnam.
Okay.
And I said, this is an ideal candidate because he lives in Melbourne and he's my friend. He's also my patient at our clinic. And I said, Gavin, this is great. Why don't you apply to go? So put Brad in contact with Gavin. Gavin applied and he was selected. And he was due to go in March last year.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the coronavirus decided otherwise. So
Right.
Gavin's been waiting until the Camino opened again. And Brad had communicated with him and said a few months ago they're planning to go again in March. Now, I said, okay, Gavin, my job is to make sure you're vaccinated so you can get to Spain. So I
Nice.
told you about him because today I work today at the clinic and Gavin came to get his COVID vaccination. So all being
Today?
well, today,
Yes.
today of all days,
Today of all days.
today of all days,
Wow.
Gavin came, and he's due for his next one in December. And
Okay.
I said I try to get you a third vaccine before the 1st of March, so you can go totally protected to Spain. And
Fantastic.
so that's good. And I found that veterans walking the Camino, Brad's book made a lot of sense because they are doing something that they're used to doing in the military, walking together, helping
Yes.
each other, looking out for a mate, and walking in nature. And it doesn't matter if they are Catholics or Protestants or Jews or Buddhists or Muslims or whatever, there is that universality of the spiritual connection that will work on
Yes.
the Camino.
Mm.
So I'm looking forward to Gavin going and
Yes.
yeah, meeting up with
Oh,
my
that's
friend, my pen friend Brad, and my face to face friend Gavin, and they meet.
wow. This is just a great story. You hadn't shared that whole thing with me before we started the interview, and I'm so glad we just talked about this because, first off, Father Stephen's a friend of the Camino Cafe, a friend of mine, and we have talked numerous times about his work with Warriors on the Way. I have not yet met Brad, but it sounds like I should meet him because he sounds also very interesting. But I love this connection here of how you know about the Camino, you go on the Camino, and then you see his book and how that book resonates with you, having also served in the military. And then you reach out to him, you form this additional Camino connection with him, and that leads to you getting to recommend Gavin to go. And now Gavin's going to get to hopefully experience the Camino in March. I think that is one of the best pilgrim stories I've heard in a long time. To me, that's that paying it forward. You know, you go on Camino, Brad goes on Camino, Stephen goes on Camino, and you're paying it forward by helping other people learn about it and to come and get the healing effects of what the Camino pilgrimage can provide for them. And that's beautiful. I hope that when Gavin comes, I get to meet him. So that'll be in March. Will they be walking the Frances, do you know?
The Francis, yeah.
Okay,
And in fact, I
fantastic.
wrote I wrote an article for one of the Australian military magazines, and I called it "The Camino: An Ancient Way?" question mark, a way back for veterans. Because after speaking to Brett, I went and did a bit of research about this. I read about other things about pilgrimage as a way of healing, and yeah, it made a lot of sense. So I am very much in favor of what Steve Rendell and Brad DeGenero are doing.
Yeah.
Veterans on the sorry, it's called Warriors. Let's say me getting my V's and W's mixed up. Warriors on the Way, and
Yes.
um, Brad's thing is called Veterans on the Camino.
Wow.
I think
Okay. That's
both got
fantastic.
Facebook pages. Yeah.
Excellent. So yeah, if you're out there listening or watching our interview today and you had a situation where where you're a veteran, please check out those two groups and consider going. Um,
And again, a
you're
plug for
hearing
Brad.
from a doctor how good it is for you.
And if to give a plug for Brad's book, it's available on Amazon.
Okay.
And if you are a veteran who's suffered, as Brad did, he said, I just hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
It's a great book, and it might inspire you to think of walking the Camino. If you want to connect with Brad, his contact details are in the book. Otherwise,
Excellent.
Steve has yet written his book. Last time we spoke, I was encouraging him to write the book. He's got a
Yes.
title, but not the book yet. And
Exactly.
Steve has his own page, and contacting him also is helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. Stephen's on warriorsontheway.org. And yeah, I hope he writes a book because I think he's got some great stories. And I know people would really benefit from reading a book by Stephen as well. Well, I'm telling you, I think I could talk to you for hours. This conversation has been wonderful. And you've really encouraged me to want to read your book. So Strangers on the Camino. I love how you came up with that title. And it's been fascinating to hear about how this Camino brought you and your son together as adults and it helped you transform your relationship, not just from father and son, but to friends as adults. And I think that's a really powerful story and just fascinating in itself. And I love the tips that you've offered today. I hope that people will go out and take a look at your book and read it. And I'm pretty confident that what we've talked about today, it's going to motivate somebody to come and walk. And thank you so much for sharing and paying it forward by sharing your experience with the book. I think that's a gift to the Camino community to share your adventure and then also to come on here and talk about your story in this group as well as in the other groups that you've shared it with. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee. I enjoyed the talk. I certainly will watch you on Zoom in the future, but I hope someday you will either come out to Australia or we'll get to Rabanal and we'll meet in person.
Oh, that would be wonderful. That would be
One more quick
wonderful.
thing, quick story. We went out to Maji, which is, Australia is a huge place. It's bigger than the US. We went to Maji for some other reason, and I thought, hey, Bill, you're in Maji, let's meet. So we met Bill and Jennifer, my wife and I, and Shivantha, and we had dinner together in Maji, which is a little town in the middle of New South Wales. But that was nice. That was before our last lockdown, which was about 4 months ago.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so Bill Bennett is someone I've met. Mark David Walsh, I meet at the Camino dinner. I'm looking forward to meeting him on December 17th. And yeah, it's a community that grows with connections. And yeah, anyway, thank you very much, Lee. I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you. And I hope, as I said, we'll meet in person someday.
Oh, me too. The pleasure has been mine, and I really look forward to it. I'm going to stop our recording and just ask everybody that is watching or listening, if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review if you've enjoyed it and maybe a nice comment. And if you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the conversation today. And be back to our next episode. I have a lot of great interviews lined up, and I think this was just a fantastic conversation to show you what's to come in the next couple of months. So anyway, Sanjiva, if you'll just stay on, I'm going to close out our interview today. Thank you to everyone for listening and watching. It just makes my day to be able to have these pilgrim conversations and to feel like we're all on the Camino together. And I hope to see you here in person someday, everyone.